Imagine waking before dawn, in a room so cold you can see your own breath. The fire in the grate died hours ago. The blankets piled on top of you are heavy, wool, rough, smelling faintly of damp and coal smoke, and yet the chill still finds its way through. Outside the window, London is already stirring. You can hear it before you can see it. The clatter of iron wheels on cobblestones, the distant cry of a milk seller, the low, rhythmic thud of a bakery worker somewhere down the lane. The city is alive, and it has been alive through the night, because Victorian London never truly slept. You rise. There is no running water in this room. There is no electric light. There is no central heating. What there is, in a middle-class household on a street like Bloomsbury or Islington, is a ceramic washbowl on a stand, a pitcher of water that a servant carried upstairs before the household woke, and a small candle burned down nearly to its base. You wash your face in water that has gone cold. You dress in layers, because in 1850, clothing is not merely fashion, it is armor against the world. This is where the story of Victorian London begins, not in the grand halls of Parliament, not in the gilded rooms of Buckingham Palace, but here, in the quiet, intimate interior of an ordinary house, where real people lived real lives, full of routine and ritual, hardship and warmth, conformity and quiet rebellion. London in 1850 is a city of extraordinary contradiction. It is the capital of the most powerful empire the world has ever seen, and yet its streets run with filth. It is a city of intellectual brilliance, producing scientists, writers, and engineers who are reshaping human civilization, and yet most of its children will never learn to read. It has more wealth concentrated in its squares and townhouses than almost any city in history, and it has poverty so severe, so grinding, that it shocks even those who witness it every day. To understand what it truly felt like to live inside a Victorian London house in 1850, you have to understand that the house itself was a statement. Architecture was not merely practical, it was moral. The layout of a home, the number of its rooms, the height of its ceilings, the quality of its plasterwork, all of it communicated something about the family who lived there. And the family, above all else, was everything. The typical middle-class terraced house in 1850 London was narrow and tall, 3 or 4 stories rising from a small basement kitchen up through the main living floors to the bedrooms at the top. From the outside, these houses presented an almost identical face to the street. Flat brick facades, iron railings enclosing a small front area, a polished brass knocker on the front door. Step inside, and the geography of the house revealed the social hierarchy of the family in perfect physical form. The basement belonged to the servants. Down below street level, past the coal cellar and the larder, was the kitchen, the true engine room of the Victorian home. Here, in a space that was perpetually hot in summer and barely warm in winter, a cook and a kitchen maid began their work before 5 o'clock in the morning. The kitchen range, a heavy iron beast burning coal continuously, was the heart of the household. It had to be cleaned, blackened, and lit every single morning. The flues had to be swept. The ash had to be removed. All of this before a single kettle was boiled or a single piece of bread was toasted for the family upstairs. The servants who worked in a middle-class London household in 1850 occupied a curious position. They were essential, utterly indispensable to the functioning of daily life, and yet socially invisible. A family employing 3 or 4 domestic servants was considered comfortably respectable, rather than particularly wealthy. Even families of modest means often kept a single general servant, a young woman who might be no older than 13 or 14, who cooked, cleaned, answered the door, carried coal, and made beds, in exchange for a wage that rarely exceeded £10 a year. She slept in a small room at the top of the house, or in the basement, ate separately from the family, and addressed her employers as Sir and Ma'am, while being addressed herself only by her first name, or, in many households, whatever name her employer found convenient. Stay with this for a moment, because it is important. The domestic servant in 1850 was not a peripheral figure. She, and it was overwhelmingly she, was the mechanism by which middle-class Victorian life functioned. Every comfort the family above stairs enjoyed was produced by her labor. The warm fire in the parlor required her to carry coal from the basement to each room, several times a day, in a heavy iron scuttle. The clean linen required her to haul water, heat it, scrub fabric against a wooden washboard, wring it, hang it, iron it. The meals appearing on the dining table at precisely 1 o'clock and 7 o'clock were the result of hours of preparation by hands that the family rarely acknowledged and almost never thanked. Move upstairs now, through the front door and into the entrance hall. In a well-appointed house, the hall was not merely a corridor. It was a threshold, a transitional space designed to impress the visitor before they were admitted into the true interior. A good hall in 1850 might feature a tiled floor, a coat stand of dark polished wood, perhaps a small console table bearing a visiting card tray. The visiting card was a technology of social navigation that the Victorians had elevated almost to an art form. You did not simply arrive at a person's house and knock. You sent your card ahead. You called at appropriate hours. You waited to be received. Social life in 1850 operated according to an elaborate choreography of etiquette, and the house itself was the stage upon which that choreography was performed. The ground floor of the typical middle-class house was divided between a front parlor and a back dining room. The parlor was, in many ways, the most significant room in the house. It was the room in which the family presented itself to the world. Here were the best pieces of furniture, a horsehair sofa, upholstered armchairs, perhaps a small pianoforte against one wall. The mantelpiece was crowded with ornaments, china figurines, a marble clock, framed silhouettes of family members, perhaps a small glass dome enclosing an arrangement of wax flowers. Every surface held something. The Victorian horror of empty space was not mere aesthetic preference. It was a display of prosperity, of culture, of taste. The windows of the parlor were dressed with heavy curtains in dark colors, deep red, forest green, burgundy, hung from thick wooden poles and drawn against the street. Privacy was precious and carefully guarded. Net curtains hung beneath the heavier drapes allowed the occupants to observe the street without themselves being observed. This small detail tells you something profound about Victorian psychology. The house was a world unto itself, separate from and superior to the chaos of the public street. The family within was protected, ordered, respectable. The world outside was unpredictable, dirty, and dangerous. And the street in London in 1850 was genuinely dangerous in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate. The Thames in this year is approaching its most catastrophic state. London's sewage, from a population of more than 2 million people, drains directly into the river. The water supply for much of the city is drawn from the same river or from wells contaminated by cesspits that have been leaching into the ground for centuries. Cholera had swept through London in 1832 and again in 1848. In 1849, the year before our story is set, more than 14,000 Londoners died of cholera in a single epidemic. The causes were not yet understood. The germ theory of disease was still years away from acceptance. Most physicians in 1850 believed illness was caused by miasma, bad air, and the air of London was certainly bad enough to lend that theory considerable credibility. Inside the house, however, there was at least the illusion of safety. The smell of the coal fire, the beeswax on the furniture, the faint sweetness of dried flowers, mixed with something older and mustier beneath. Damp plaster, old wood, the particular staleness of rooms sealed against the cold. All of it created an atmosphere that was simultaneously suffocating and deeply familiar. This was home. And in 1850, home was not merely where you lived. It was who you were. Keep watching, because what happened deeper inside this house, in the dining room, the nursery, the bedrooms, and the hidden spaces that polite Victorian society never discussed openly, reveals something even more extraordinary about the people who lived here and the world they were trying so desperately to hold together. The dining room sat directly behind the parlor, separated by a set of folding doors that could be opened on formal occasions to create a single large entertaining space. On ordinary days, those doors remained closed, and the dining room served as the true heart of family life. Here, the family gathered 3 times daily with a regularity that bordered on the sacred. Mealtimes in a Victorian household were not merely opportunities to eat. They were rituals of family cohesion, social order, and domestic discipline. Breakfast in a middle-class London home in 1850 was served between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning, after the father had already been downstairs for some time, reading the newspaper, most likely the Times, which cost 5 pence, and was considered the definitive record of respectable opinion. The breakfast spread was substantial by any measure. Porridge, cold meats, boiled eggs, toast made on a long-handled fork held over the fire, and thick-cut marmalade that had been made in the kitchen the previous January, when Seville oranges were briefly available at the market. Tea was poured from a heavy silver-plated pot, and the mother of the household presided over its distribution with the quiet authority of someone managing a small empire, because that is precisely what she was doing. The Victorian middle-class wife in 1850 occupied a position of profound complexity. Legally, she was almost entirely without rights. Upon marriage, her property, her wages, her very legal identity had transferred to her husband under the doctrine of coverture. She could not vote, could not sign contracts, could not retain her own earnings. And yet within the walls of her home, she wielded real and considerable power. The management of the household, the hiring and dismissal of servants, the planning of meals, the keeping of accounts, the education of young children, the maintenance of the family's social relationships, all of this fell to her. A well-run Victorian household was a logistical achievement of genuine complexity, and the woman at its center knew it, even if the world outside rarely acknowledged it. The children appeared at breakfast already dressed, already neat, already composed, or at least required to appear so. Childhood in a middle-class Victorian home in 1850 was a structured and supervised experience. Young children lived primarily in the nursery on the upper floors, under the care of a nursemaid, and were brought down to the main rooms of the house at designated times. They were expected to greet their parents politely, to sit quietly, to speak when addressed, and to demonstrate by their behavior that they were being raised correctly. The emotional warmth between Victorian parents and children was real. Letters and diaries of the period overflow with genuine tenderness, but it was expressed within a framework of formality that strikes later generations as almost theatrical. The nursery itself was a world apart. On the upper floors, away from the formal rooms below, children lived in a space that combined schoolroom, bedroom, and playroom into one. The toys of 1850 were handmade and precious: carved wooden animals, cloth dolls with painted china faces, spinning tops, hoops of iron or wood. Books were present in any educated household: illustrated volumes of natural history, moral tales, religious texts. The nursery bookshelf in a prosperous home might include works by authors whose names are still recognized, because 1850 sits precisely at the moment when children's literature was beginning to be taken seriously as a form. A governess, if the family could afford one, occupied the strange social limbo that was perhaps uniquely Victorian. Educated enough to teach French, music, drawing, and composition, she was too genteel for the servants' hall, and yet not quite a member of the family. She ate with the children, lived on the upper floors, and navigated her days with a social delicacy that required constant vigilance. The governess in 1850 was almost invariably a woman who had suffered some reversal of family fortune, the death of a father, the bankruptcy of a brother, and had been forced by circumstance into paid employment. She was, in that sense, a living reminder of how precarious middle-class respectability truly was, and perhaps that is partly why her position was so awkward. She reflected back to the family, a possibility they preferred not to contemplate. Now descend again, past the kitchen, past the coal cellar, into the geography of the house that sits below the respectability of the main floors. Because the house in 1850 was also a machine for managing what could not be seen, the smells that had to be contained, the dirt that had to be hidden. The bodily functions that polite Victorian society found almost impossible to discuss openly. Sanitation in a London house in 1850 was at a critical turning point. Some wealthier households had recently installed water closets, early flushing toilets, connected to the sewer system, but the sewer system itself drained into the Thames, and the water supply often came from the Thames, so the improvement was less complete than it appeared. Many households, including respectable middle-class ones, still relied on a privy in the backyard or a chamber pot emptied by a servant each morning. The contents went into a cesspit beneath the yard, which was emptied periodically by night soil men who came after dark, a profession that was both essential and utterly invisible to polite society. The smell in many parts of London, particularly in summer, was extraordinary. Contemporary accounts describe it with a frankness that makes clear it was not merely unpleasant but genuinely overwhelming. Bathing was a weekly event at best, and it required considerable preparation. Water had to be heated on the kitchen range and carried upstairs in jugs and pails by servants. The portable hip bath, a shallow oval tub of painted tin, was set before the bedroom fire, filled laboriously with hot water, and then emptied afterward by the same laborious process in reverse. Wealthier households might have a dedicated bathroom by 1850, but it was still unusual. For the working class crowded into the rookeries and courts of St. Giles, Whitechapel, or Southwark, even this level of hygiene was an impossible luxury. Entire families shared single rooms, sometimes single beds, with no private space, and no means of washing beyond a public pump that served dozens of households. The divide between the middle-class terraced house and the working-class dwelling in London in 1850 was not merely one of comfort. It was a divide between entirely different experiences of what it meant to be human in a city. In the rookeries, those dense, decaying warrens of subdivided buildings and airless courts, a single room might house a family of 6 or 8, plus lodgers taken in to help meet the rent. The walls ran with damp, the ceilings were low and blackened, light entered grudgingly through windows that often looked not onto a street, but onto the back wall of another building 3 feet away. The smell was something that visitors to these areas described with visible distress. The accumulated odor of unwashed bodies, rotting food, open drains, and the particular staleness of too many people breathing in too small a space. And yet even here, people made homes. They hung pictures. They kept small ornaments on the mantelpiece. They maintained rituals of Sunday best clothing, of family meals however sparse, of community and neighborliness that middle-class observers sometimes grudgingly admitted was stronger in the rookeries than in the respectable streets they themselves inhabited. The human instinct to create order and warmth within whatever space is available does not diminish with poverty. Return now to the respectable house as evening falls. This is a moment worth pausing for, because the transformation of a Victorian interior at dusk was something genuinely remarkable. Through the afternoon, the house had been lit by whatever pale grey light filtered through the net curtains. Now, as darkness gathered outside, the lamplighter was moving along the street, touching his long pole to the gas lamps mounted on iron posts outside, and each one bloomed into a pale, slightly greenish light that cast moving shadows on the cobblestones. Inside, the household shifted to candlelight and the light of the oil lamp, a soft, warm, slightly unsteady illumination that made every room feel enclosed and intimate. The parlor in the evening was the stage for the family's private life. The fire built up, the curtains drawn against the dark, the family gathered in a circle of lamplight. The father read or wrote letters or examined documents brought home from his work in commerce or law or medicine, or one of the dozen other occupations that sustained the Victorian professional class. The mother sewed, always sewed, because the maintenance of clothing and household linens was a continuous labor that never ended. An older daughter might be practicing at the pianoforte, running through a piece by Mendelssohn, or one of the popular drawing room songs that were printed cheaply and sold in enormous numbers. The younger children were already in bed upstairs. Music in the Victorian home was not background, it was the entertainment. There was no recorded sound in 1850. If you wanted music, someone had to make it. The ability to play the pianoforte was considered an essential accomplishment for a middle-class young woman, not because Victorians were especially musical by nature, but because the home had to generate its own pleasures. An evening of family music, perhaps a game of cards, reading aloud from a novel. Dickens had already published David Copperfield by 1850, and the sensation it caused was enormous, or simply conversation. These were the textures of Victorian domestic evening life. And then, late, the house prepared for sleep. Fires banked, candles snuffed, chamber pots positioned, the elaborate process of undressing completed, with the help of a lady's maid for those wealthy enough to have one, or by one's own careful management of hooks and laces for those who did not. The Victorian nightgown was a substantial garment, long, full, made of thick cotton or flannel, because the bedrooms were cold and would be colder still before morning. Bed curtains on a four-poster, or thick blankets piled high on a simpler frame, created the closest thing available to a sealed, warm space. As the last candle went out in the Victorian London house, the sounds of the city continued outside, the watchman's call, the distant bark of a dog, the sound of hooves on wet cobblestones as a late carriage moved through the lamplight. Inside, in the darkness, the house held its people, the family above stairs, the servant below, the children in the nursery, each in their allotted place, each contained within the rigid, intricate, human architecture of Victorian life. They would do it all again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. In a world that was changing faster than almost any generation before them had experienced, the routines of the house were the anchor. The fire lit at 5, the breakfast at 8, the calls paid and received, the meals served and cleared, the candles lit as darkness fell. This was what it meant to live in a Victorian London house in 1850. Not the grand sweep of empire or the drama of political history, but this, the cold water in the morning pitcher, the smell of coal smoke and beeswax, the sound of a pianoforte drifting up through the floors, the extraordinary, ordinary, vanished world of a house that was, above all else, a life.